The Valley Current.
Hey, Margaret, how are you?
Good.
Had such a busy day today. You've been interviewing other authors, and you're an author, and you're writing books. I've been following you. I've been reading your chapters, sneak preview. You're famous.
Oh, yeah.
You are. You look as young as I remember you from 10 years ago, so you're doing something right.
It has been 10 years.
I think so. I hate to say it, but I think it's
You know,
true.
that guy got kicked out of the CEO-ness of his job.
In the back of my mind, I didn't want to bring it up because it was such a strange chapter, I'm sure, in your life.
They say adversity is the mother of invention. This has certainly been the case of the course of my professional life. In 2014, I was creating a revolutionary recruiting software when the code was stolen.
Right.
And Jack got me out of jail.
That's how we came to know each other. It's been almost 10 years. And I have to say, I knew that you had at least one book in you, perhaps more. And I'm sure there's more coming. But tell us the journey, because you run a consulting organization that helps to transform businesses. And my podcast is listened to by lots of businesses that probably do need to be transformed. So tell us how you got there, because from high school, I don't think you ever said to me that your whole idea in high school was to start your own company, was it?
No. So I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, and what was unique about my high school was I think we had 250 people in the graduating class. And the kind of conversations we were having were very different from any 17-year-olds I know.
Right.
But it was more of a philosophy school. We were having conversations about abortion versus adoption, about God versus the Big Bang Theory. I mean, about Adam and Eve versus the Big Bang Theory.
Right.
So we were in deep philosophical questions before I ever went to college. And the other
your best education was probably high school. That's what I say. My best education was an all-boys Catholic strict Jesuit high school in Brooklyn, New York.
Yeah. Well, we had the first day of my high school, my first day of freshman year in high school, it was 1979, and there was a sit-in on the lawn. So I'm not kidding you. I know nothing. I know shit from Shinola. I get out of the car, my brother drops me off, and there's all these hippies on the lawn passing what I learned was then a bong. And they were protesting that a teacher, Mr. Arliss was his name, was fired. He was a religion teacher, and he was fired either for asking, questions that were not aligned with the Catholic Church. But it was a very interesting first day of school. And what I learned in this school is that it was okay to have your own opinion. And I think it actually, I became a woman in that school. Here's something interesting. I didn't know it was happening to me until it happened. So I left the school the last year because my parents had gotten a divorce and I wanted to graduate early. And at the Catholic school, you had to pay a whole year of tuition. So I went to the public school.
Okay.
And I was only there for 3 months. And these girls in the cafeteria they had like a stealing mob. So we're sitting at this big table. I'm here, they're here. And they're talking about how they're ripping people off. And I saw them and I went home to my mom and I said, well, first of all, I'm not going to be friends with them. I don't want to be friends with them. But do I tell? Mm-hmm. And then we got in a whole conversation about integrity. Right. And I wasn't even graduated high school, and I was having conversations about integrity. So Sacred Heart of Mary, I think, taught all of us really good, solid values and discernment and the art of questioning, to be really curious and not to follow the same old way everybody does things. So.
Critical thinking. Critical thinking was early in my high school as well. And it sounds like you were at Sacred Heart of Mary. Where is that? Is that in
Rolling Meadows, Illinois?
Rolling Meadows, Rolling Meadows.
Rolling Meadows.
Where is that? Is that near Chicago, or where is that?
I'm a Northwest suburban girl.
Okay. So when did you come to California?
Well, I moved to California officially in 2012, but I was traveling here for 2 years on and off every other week before that to see if it was the right place for me. I wanted to be here. So I sold my recruiting business in 2008, about 4 months before the bottom fell out of the economy. Sold my house 5 days before the bottom fell out, and I lived in a McMansion, and I had went to a seminar, and they said, there will be a time when we don't need those big houses anymore. But it took me a couple years to sell it because I didn't want to part with it. It was my home.
Right.
Put the house on the market, and it sold within 24 hours. Got full price. 1 week later, that house had declined by $450,000.
Wow.
But so I sold the business. I was kind of living off of my proceeds. And I started building out a coaching curriculum. While I owned the recruiting company, I was moonlighting at Landmark Education, which is the grandchild of EST. And I was a seminar leader. And I saw how hundreds of people were shifting their behavior and their attitude when they started to take personal responsibility for their thoughts, feelings, beliefs. Right. I loved it. I loved it, loved it, loved it. So I wanted to do it for a living. That's a different story, but I left Landmark Education because you couldn't work in the same business you were volunteering for. So I was doing 20 hours a week with them, not getting paid, assisting for over a decade, and they were going to stop me from doing what I wanted to do. So that doesn't work you can't put Maji in a corner.
Right. Can't put Maji in a corner. That's a good subtitle. So then you moved to California?
No. So during this time when I was thinking about selling my company, I took a Jack Canfield course, Breakthrough to Success. And Jack, it was 1 week and then there was another week. And Jack started every day with us meditating and hugging each other, believe it or not, and doing yoga and visualizing our future.
He was an S guy, wasn't he? Associated?
Well, he was a lot of things. He was also mentored under W. Clement Stone. I mean, he's the man when it comes to transformation and not being like, this is the company and this is the only way. Like at other places I participated with, there was only one pathway to enlightenment. Jack wrote a book called The Success Principles. Jack is who inspired me to write Ignite Culture. And how I wrote Ignite Culture was basically an amalgamation or integration of all the training I've ever had in my adult life. And that's what Jack did with Success Principles. So anyhow, in that program, I created my 2020 vision. And in my 2020 vision, I lived in Northern California, and I worked with CEOs to help them fall back in love with their company and align their mind, body, and spirit with their highest calling and their business. Okay. And then I thought I needed to develop a software company in order to be able to do what I really wanted to do, which entered Jack Russo. I started coming out here every other week. I had this fixed thought that I had to have a software company, sell it for millions so that I can do what my heart's desire was, which is to do culture work with CEOs, because I had a heuristic, a barrier, an anchor on what I thought coaches could earn and the difference I thought coaches could make. To me, it was a very kind of fake industry, a lot of charlatans, and I just thought I have to be somebody before I can do that.
You were probably shaped by that experience at Landmark Education where you volunteered. They probably constrained you in such a way that you thought, hey, there's not going to be much money in this whole coaching thing, so I got to stop away.
Right,
I got to stop away a few million.
Because actually, as a person leading transformation, we never got paid.
Right, exactly.
So it was exactly that. Good job, Jack. That's where I got that limiting thought. And I also knew a lot of coaches because I'd been to coaching school that were broke. Like the average coach in the United States makes under $40,000 a year.
Right.
And then they're coaching people on how to be highly successful, which is mind blowing to me that anybody would pay them without making sure they fact checked their success history.
Right.
So anyhow, I think I've got to build something, sell it so that I can do what I really want to do. So I'm this will tell you a little bit about my personality. I go to Italy to take my son on his high school graduation trip.
Right.
And I'm standing on a mountain or a hill in Sorrento. And I kind of...
Oh, that's where my grandmother came from. Sorrento.
I'm from Sicily, so not far.
Not far.
I'm standing on this, Sal's restaurant was right up there. Sal was teaching us cooking classes. Mm-hmm. I walk up there like 2.5 hours because exercise allows me to get centered. And I say, God, if you can hear me, send me a husband and help me build a software company. And so I make my request to God. So this will be the next book.
Yeah.
So anyway, I go back to Willow Glen that I'm only living at every other week. Right. And I walk down the street and I see this sign on a door. And it says, I can't say the name because you and I made me sign a document that I couldn't, but let's just call it Bob Grows.
Okay.
It said, we take your HR process and turn it into technology.
Wow, what a find.
I had a hiring process, conscious hiring. It was Keen Hire's unique selling proposition for this recruiting company that I owned for all these years. Made oodles of money, was highly successful in the Chicago market. As a matter of fact, I was in the Pinnacle Society, which is the top 3% of all recruiters in the nation. Right. And it was because of conscious hiring, which was our secret sauce. I sold the company, but I carved out that IP. Right. So I walk into their company or their little office, and I see this massive print of what their app does. And it looked exactly like I wanted my app. So I thought, oh my God, God is talking to me. Right. This is it. This is it. And so I got into a relationship with these people with no signed agreements, nothing. And it was, and then I brought my son in, and then I brought my business partner in from Keen Hire. And we started building, and then I started bringing other friends in and clients in, and they were on the advisory committee. I even brought board members in. And over the time, the software got created, and it wasn't any longer a workflow process. They wanted it to become the new LinkedIn. Now, everything in my body was, we're not going to compete with LinkedIn, because the president of that software company wanted to disintermediate the human out of human resources.
Yeah, that's pretty hard.
And I had done hiring for 25 years, and I was friggin' awesome at it. There's no way AI can do matching in soft skills. It can't. It's it's the inflection in a voice. It's the whole neuro-linguistic programming that AI doesn't know how to do. The tone of the face, where the eyes are going when they're talking to you, the sweaty armpits, the beads of sweat when you ask a question that they can't answer. Right. So I was like, hell no. But my son was there, and he was like, Mom, you're a baby boomer. I don't know. So my son was like, Mom, you don't understand this technology, and you're a baby boomer, and let the millennials do it. And so I was sort of like, let's see what happened. But then my partner wasn't getting paid, and she started to ask questions. And one day my phone is blowing up with a text number. I have no idea who it is. The phone, no idea. And finally, after 26 missed calls, I answered the phone, and it was Stephanie Marbury, my former partner. They fired her. They didn't tell me. They shut her email down. They cut her out completely. She thought I had something to do with it. I did not. Mm-hmm. And when I asked the guy about it, my so-called 50-50 partner, he said, we have you. We have your intellectual property. We have the software 80% made, and we have your son. You don't like what we're doing. There's the door. Oh, and I just about freaked the hell out. I was laying in bed the next day, like I couldn't actually, I went into work and my hand was shaking so much I couldn't even open the door. I was in a complete amygdala hijack. no pun intended,
right.
long term.
Right.
And so I went home. I knew enough to know I can't go in today. Like I can't go in.
You didn't even have to look at your Aura ring to detect that you weren't sleeping well. Gotta get a plug in for Aura here. Not that they're a sponsor, they should be. I'm a big believer in Aura ring.
So am I. Yeah. So anyway, I'm laying in bed. It's 11 o'clock in the morning, and the same son that works at that company comes home because we lived, like I was renting an apartment at 85 and 87, right by Willow Glen. He comes home, he goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I've screwed everything up. I lost all my retirement, like about $1 million.
Yeah.
Just $1 million. And all this time." And he goes, "The woman who raised me," just like this, like 22-year-old kid, "the woman who raised me would never lay in bed and give up. She would get up and do something about it." Now, I didn't know what the call to action was, but the kid called me into action. So I went to see a therapist. I went to do what all action would be. And I went to see a Kaiser therapist, and I met the guy, and he said, "Honey, you don't need Prozac. You're not depressed. You need to stand up and fight for what you believe in." Right. So my now best friend back then was a client. She said, "We went to dinner with a guy who they hired you, and you helped his company, and her and her brother and this guy are like, you need to go for what you want." And the next day I called computer law, and Jack Russo came to my aid. And 18 months later, we got the intellectual property back.
We transformed things for you.
Yeah, you did.
Transformation.
But so that was all great. And in the meantime, I moved to California because my vision was to be here.
Right.
But I had a coach at that time. Her name was Gina. I had a lot of coaches. I had somebody that helped me get ready for the deposition. Right. Cookie Boudreau. I had Gina Gabellini. And Gina said to me, "Do you remember when I told you you don't need to develop a software company to create your vision?" And I said, "Well, not really, but okay." And she said, you're thinking very linearly. If I do this, and I do this, then I can have this." Right. And in that moment, I realized that I had put all those obstacles in my way. It was greed that had me get into business with that guy. Right. Total greed. I wanted to make a lot of money. I was not listening to myself. I was not making sure that I had good agreements in place. There were things he was doing with the software that I didn't trust, but I thought he was smarter than I was. And so I reached out to all my clients. I told them that Keen Hire was no longer, and that I was going to start coaching organizations on creating alignment. And I started getting people hiring me. There's the tail.
That set you in motion to have a great company, because you have a great company, and now you've come out with a book called Ignite Culture that's been in the works for a while. And I got some email deliveries of different chapter summaries, or is it the actual chapter?
Yeah. So a couple of things I just want to say is 2 years after that therapist appointment, KeenAlignment made it into the Inc. 5000.
Nice.
We had helped several companies that had toxic, destructive cultures, and then several more that were transitioning leadership. Like old school was retiring or leaving, and new school had to come in, but the employees didn't want to adjust. And we just had so much success because we bring in 20 years of understanding talent, and then all the human potential, and the company is where the intersection is. Right. So the book, Ignite Culture, is really stories of different companies we've worked with. And then the workbook, we're actually creating a workbook, the recipe for what is the roadmap for how to transform your culture or elevate your culture or create a constructive, high performance, intentional company. So what you have is you have the sneak peeks, which we took one page out of each chapter, and that's what you're getting. Okay, got it. The actual book is $20. It's a paperback. It's already a bestseller. It's made all the lists. Nice. Not Wall Street Journal. I mean, not New York Times, but Wall Street Journal. SHRM just made a massive order for it, the Society of Human Resources Management, and we're getting really good feedback. And the book is put into 3 sections. Section 1 is about the leader, him or herself, doing the whole book is about transforming. It's about empowering and leading a high-performance organizational culture from the inside out.
Nice.
So the first section is asking the CEO, are you the problem or the solution?
Right.
And then it really gets into looking in the mirror. The second section is about the leadership team. And the third section is about getting to critical mass, taking this methodology, this roadmap to the entire organization. And so the last 4 days, I have been recording the audiobook in this same place that I am sitting now.
Nice.
And as I'm reading the book to myself and my producer, I am seeing the faces of companies I'm currently working with that are experiencing everything the book talks about.
Right.
And they're not actually applying, like they're my customers, but they're not applying the exact. And some of them are brand new customers, like just signed a statement of work and we're doing a deep alignment. But what I've been doing is taking snapshots of the book and emailing it to them or texting them and saying, read chapter 7, paragraph 4, because it's exactly what you asked me for coaching in.
Right.
So one of the reasons I wrote the book is I'm 58 years old. I'm probably only going to work at the level and the pace that I am now for another 4 or 5 years. But I want to teach people to fish. I've always been a teacher, a trainer. I believe in transformation. I believe in and my calling is to liberate the human spirit. Right. So the book really is, here's the recipe, y'all. Read it. And if you want help, I'll be happy to help you. But you're going to have to do some deep internal work like I had to do when I lost my software for a year and a half. Like I had to do when I left Landmark and couldn't lead seminars anymore. And if I couldn't lead seminars and do the one thing I loved doing, then what was I going to do? Right. And so it's the recovery back to self that this book is really about. And then it's getting our employees to recover back to self so we can have high performance, humanistic, self-actualizing, and affiliation, which is like collaboration. So our organizations can be market leaders and have an emergent, agile culture, which is required for the shit show that is going on in the world right now. Right.
So what do you do? Let me ask you some pointed questions because I've read each of the sneak previews that you sent, which I think were like 14 or so. And the questions that emerged for me were things like, well, what do you do when you walk in and you say the leader really has to leave? He's the problem. As you say, he's not the solution, or she. I mean, I could think of a number of our clients where I've said to the board, you know, you're at a stage where maybe the founder needs to kind of become the CTO as opposed to remaining the CEO because he or she is not going to raise the next big money or not going to get to the next big deal. It's a hard thing to face, but a lot of companies have to face it, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple ways we would approach that. First of all, we always recommend sound and current data. And as an attorney, I'm sure you appreciate that.
Yeah.
So we do a survey called the Ideal Actual Culture Survey, where people fill out a report of exactly what they want in a high performance culture, what they think is needed to have the alchemy of a high performance culture.
Right.
And then we ask them another survey, a group of survey questions, which is, what do you currently have? And so I'm working with a company right now that I of course won't say the name, but they're $2.5 billion. They're exchanged on the New York Stock Exchange. So they're a public company.
Yeah, big
1,500 employees or 15,000 employees off there.
Right.
And the CEO is a great guy. As a matter of fact, everybody says he's the best boss they've ever had. But they have people on the leadership team that hate each other.
Yeah.
And it's completely toxic. And they each of them individually thinks it's the other guy and the other guy and the other guy. So on the ideal versus actual culture, they all want high performance, healthy, self-actualized, high achievement, affiliative, humanistic, and self-actualized.
Right.
And humanistic.
Right.
But what they have is extremely passive aggressive.
Right.
They have a massive gap. So the data gives people real feedback, and most people in technology don't argue with data.
Right.
They like it.
Right.
So that's one way, is to have them look at the disparity in the data. Now we have them look as a whole group, but then we also meet with people one-on-one. Right. We also do assessments that look at what does it take to lead in the world that we're living in the 21st century, which has been quite chaotic since it started. Yep. And it's just continuing to get more chaotic, more volatile, more uncertain, and even more ambiguous.
The term is VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, I think is what the VUCA stands for.
So we also do individual surveys. We will look at the leader and evaluate them in 7 core areas. Okay. From seeing a vision, from being able to conceptualize a concept, to being able to inspire others to that concept and strategy, to being able to bring the ball over the finish line, like get things done. Right. And also it covers the ability to develop themselves. So we often, and actually boards have brought me in many times to assess the CEO and the leadership team, and then do one-on-ones with everybody individually, and then as a collective to say, here's where your team is strong and here's your gaps. So before firing a CEO or moving them or getting rid of them, we want to know, do they want to get better? Because change is possible. Now, if they don't want to get better, then we coach them to find it inside themselves, to search inside yourself, as Google's SIY would say, what do I really want? What makes me happy? Is it the power of owning this company, or is there something better for me to do? The reason somebody wouldn't let go is because they don't have anything else. Before I saw a bigger picture of Northern California doing culture work, all I could see was recruiting. That's all my mind could see. So often we hold on to what we have because we haven't reinvented something else. So we prefer rehabilitation if rehabilitation is a possibility, but the numbers also don't lie. If we've got a CEO who is not good at conceptualizing a vision, is not good at inspiring people, doesn't hold people accountable, doesn't create team, would rather just work alone, well, then we start to talk to them of what's the impact of doing all these things you're not good at on your health. Right. And that starts to open up the possibilities.
Yeah, so you've done the coaching both ways, for people that are CEOs and for boards that need some help in getting to the next level, and probably everything in between. So I have a question for you, which was inspired by one of the sneak peeks, which is, what do you recommend about companies about going back to offices? You must be a big believer in in-person interaction, right? Versus hybrid approach, or the Zoom only approach?
Well, I think the Zoom only approach is deadly. First of all, it's not good for our health. Human beings have 4 basic needs. They have a need for significance, a need for connection, a need for challenge or change or to be stretched, and a need for certainty. Zoom is a 2-dimensional world. You can't, and culture is energy. You can't sense energy over Zoom. But I do think it's here to stay, that we will be living in a hybrid world where people maybe, like my son works for a very large tech company. He only goes in monthly, and he works with people all over the globe. So his people are everywhere. But, the company he works for is making it amenable for people to come in, stay 3 or 4 days, work with people. They're doing golf outings and other events where they're bringing people together. When we do the third way, you asked earlier, how do you reform or transform a leadership team? We do these workshops, 2.5-day deep alignment immersion retreats. They're always live. Either you come to Santa Cruz or I go to you. It's more expensive if I go to you, but we need you in the room, because when you are with people in a room, you start to see their behavior, you start to hear and see their tonality in their voice, especially when they're stressed out. And then we do a lot of training online after, but 3 times in 1 year, we're going to ask that you come together with us. And we do the same thing in our Culture Catalyst program. 3 times a year, we want to be knee to knee. And
right.
so companies, I have another client who does architecture, they do workspace. What they're seeing is companies creating live, work, and play space. Like, come in, we'll all collaborate, we'll have innovation day, we'll do these innovation hubs. But if you've got a team that is never getting together, you're leaving something on the table. So what if you have to pay 50 grand every quarter or 3 times a year to bring people together? Don't just bring them together for foosball. Have an expert, I'm not saying me, but someone like me, come in and teach them something and bring the energy, elevate the energy so people walk away and are infused at least for a couple months.
Right.
But working at home, man, it's got all of its perks, and it's also got a lot of distractions.
Right.
And if I'm left to my own devices all the time at home, what if I have trash in my head? What if I don't have a positive environment that I live in? So I think it's dangerous to go 100% remote, even if you're hiring people globally. Build in to the bank account money to spend to have people be together.
So do you think when you look at these different companies, and a lot of them are tech companies, where they're saying, no, we're going to allow people to work anywhere, do you think those companies are eventually doomed? Like, in the really big long-term view, would you say those companies are likely going to lose market share, lose talent, lose creativity, and eventually they'll either get sold or they'll close down or something will happen, because you just can't get the kind of creativity if you don't have people coming together on some regularity, whether it's 3 days a week or 2 days a week?
Well, so I agree and I don't.
Okay.
So here's the deal. Like I said, if you're going to have a remote workforce, build in innovation days, where people come together, not over Zoom. You can do things over Zoom and you can use all this technology. But, you know, even my eye doctor said, Maja, you got to stay off Zoom. Your eyes are going bad. And we're going to start hearing things like the electromagnetic waves are not good for us, to be sitting in front of the computer on camera, on lights all day. Not good. However, you will get more diversity and more widespread talent from all aspects of the planet if you have an open docket on where people can live. And you give people an opportunity to self-actualize. However, I would build it in, I would bake it into the employment offer. We need you in the office once a quarter or once a month for 1 week, not for 2 days, for 1 week. And some companies that I work with are doing it 1 week a month. Some companies I work with are doing it 1 week a quarter. Some companies are moving. We're going to have our meeting in New York. Then we're going to have our meeting in Texas. Then we're going to have our meeting in Detroit. We're going to have our meeting in London. But I do think if you have a remote workforce, you have to double down on your one-on-ones. You have to double down on how much attention you pay to people. You have to really spend time understanding who you have on the team. And you also have to double down on the quality of your meetings. Having people show up at meetings that they don't need to be in, just so you can see the whites of their eyes that they're working, is really not good. And then the other thing, this is unpopular, but I don't think it's an accident that we all went remote. And then all these tech companies are laying off all these people. Exactly. What's happening is the unproductive people who do not know how to manage their own time. Now, there's going to be a lot of haters that hear this and are going to be mad at me. But if you're not, like, I am a naturally productive person. I've been productive since I was 19 years old in a straight commission job. Okay, 20, in a straight commission job. If I wasn't productive, I didn't eat and I didn't feed the children. But not everybody is intrinsically motivated to stay productive and get work done. They get distracted. They have scattered attention syndrome. Scattered brain syndrome. They have the adrenaline bias where they're doing a lot of busy work but not getting anything really done. And I think a piece of this layoff, at least I would say 40% my intuition, because remember I was in recruiting. This is my 8th recession, I think, or 8th economic weirdness, maybe 7th. we have to look since 1983. I think a majority of it is I am fleeing myself of unproductive people.
Right.
And then there is, yes, we overhired. And then in that, some good people get let go because either they didn't know how to make themselves be noticed, or they fell into bad habits, or they were working on a project that just wasn't successful.
Right.
But I think there is a way. I think there is a way, and it's not the Jack and Maji way of 1983 that we were raised up in. I mean, I've been listening to Tim Ferriss of 4 Hour Workweek. I resisted that guy for a decade or longer. Right. And I just got back from the jungle in Peru, and all the 30-year-olds that I was with, specifically the men, idolized Tim Ferriss. Yeah. And so I started listening just to be open-minded. Right. And he's a tech guy. He's made a ton of money on tech. He
did a great TED talk about how he almost committed suicide. I'm sure you've heard that story.
I have not.
Oh, there's a great TED talk, because when I first learned of him, I thought it was all show and no substance. But he and I'm not a huge fan of his, but I am a huge fan of someone who is a huge fan of his. There's a Stanford doctor who I'm going to send you the link to, because you said something about, ending your career in 4 or 5 years. And I'm going to convince you that's not the right attitude for a variety of health reasons. So the reason we're doing this podcast may be somewhat helpful to your own view of what your calling really is and what you do with it. But Dr. Peter Attia is an MD from Stanford. He now moved, of course, with everyone else to Austin, Texas. And Tim Ferriss is in Austin, Texas. Tim Ferriss inspired Peter Attia to do a podcast that's become very successful about really self-management, lifestyle management. And so if you listen to his podcast, it's a super fired way of learning about how to take care of your health. Not that I'm plugging him, but when I think of Tim Ferriss, I think, well, the real substance behind Tim Ferriss is actually his medical doctor, who's Peter Attia. And the suicide was prevented probably by a host of other friends, if not Peter Attia, people like him. And it was a smart, good thing, if you ask me, that they got connected to him. So yeah, you have to read that book, I suppose. I'm going to send it to you as a gift for you doing the podcast. It's Peter Attia's Outlive, but he's got an Audible version you can listen to while you exercise.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Well done. You would love.
I want to make it clear, I'm not leaving the world of work.
Yeah, don't leave us.
I am leaving the way I do it. By the time I am 65, I will only lead retreats. All my training will be online, and I will be working 4 hours a week unless I'm in a retreat.
Oh, okay. So Tim Ferriss really did motivate you to get to the 4-hour work week. Wow.
Well,
that's
here's the thing. He believes that we spin a lot of our wheels, and I'm starting to see. I mean, I see it with my clients all the time. Like, why are you guys doing that? Oh, well, we've always done it that way. But I hired an assistant out of the Philippines. She is more productive, more talented, more creative than anybody I've had doing admin or creative work for me in the U.S. And I don't have to. It goes without saying that she's much more reasonable in cost. Well, the more people I hire that are super expensive, that are not transforming the world or liberating the human spirit, the harder it is for me to work less.
Right. I'm going to get your book. I'm going to read it. And I'm going to list 10 questions that inevitably will arise. I listed a couple just were generated from the sneak peeks. And let's do another version of this. But it generated a lot of thought. And I highly recommend the book just based on the sneak peeks, because you're motivating people to think about culture in a new transformative way, which I think is really based on lots of principles that are out there, but you kind of melded them together.
I did.
Great. Yeah, in a smart way. So I give you a big applause for that. I want to say you're looking young, so keep it going. No one would believe you're in your 50s now. No one would believe that. I don't know if you're still single, because I have all these guys that say, I can't find the smart single woman out there. And I think to myself, I wonder if Margaret is still single or what she's up to, but
Margaret is still single out of choice, and I am waiting for the right person to come my way, who is smart, who is fit, who loves to travel, and wants to make a difference on the planet.
I like that. So who knows what's going to come out of this, Mags? You're going to love it. You're going to love the result. Anyway, thanks for spending your time. I will definitely set another date after I get the book and read it, and I'll send you the list of questions in advance too.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.